Throughout this course, we're going to be teaching you Standard Mandarin. And why do I say Standard Mandarin as opposed to just Mandarin? Isn't it just a language? Well, it's actually a special language compared to many places. You know, in France, they speak French because that's the language of the country. Mandarin is a somewhat manufactured language because it was meant to be a lingua franca for the country, essentially a unifying language. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Lord of the Rings, but there's a scene early on where Frodo is looking at the ring, and it's like in Mordor language, and Gandalf says,
"In the common tongue, it says, 'One ring to rule them all.'"
And I remember thinking, wouldn't that be cool if the whole world had a common language like Esperanto or something that we all could speak? But China actually has that. So technically, there's no place in the country that local dialect is 100% Mandarin. The closest place is the capital of Hebei province, Shijiazhuang. So why would you want to learn Standard Mandarin if there's technically no place where somebody speaks it 100%? Well, it's basically because everybody understands it.
In fact, if you look around China, there are the dialects are so different. It's not like, for example, in England, like technically, I think it's every 25 square miles, like the accent changes.
Yeah.
We understand each other, right?
Yeah.
No problem. But in China, it's not that. Right?
Exactly.
They actually, in a lot of places, there's no way. They're essentially separate languages, like, for example, the Shanghai language, the Cantonese language, right, in Hong Kong.
Fujian
Guangdong
province, they can't understand
Fujian,
at all.
Right? There's loads of areas like that. So they need this Mandarin as like an agreed upon language that everyone's going to speak. And it's based upon Beijing sort of area, that dialect.
Yeah, the northern dialect. And that kind of brings us to the second point of why you would want to learn Standard Mandarin, as opposed to maybe just your local dialect. So you move to China and you go live in the Beijing area, or you move to the best city, Chengdu, one of those. But
Biased.
you go there and you go, well, okay, this particular dialect is different. Shouldn't I go learn this dialect? Well, obviously, we've said the first point, which is that everybody speaks Mandarin. So if you leave that place, you'll still be able to communicate. But the second reason is because there's many places that speak some version of Mandarin. It's even Sichuan dialect, which the first time I heard it, I thought sounded totally different from Mandarin. I ended up being able to understand it without ever going to study it particularly. And it was because I was standing on a foundation of understanding the principles of the language. So you hear how somebody says something, and then you go, okay, well, I can hear that that's similar enough to what I know to realize the change that they're making. And then my brain just pattern recognized over a long enough period of time, and now I can understand Sichuan dialect. And so this is just to say that you should learn the principles of the standard language, and then you'll naturally be able to fan out into sort of local dialects and figuring things out that way, which is hugely to your advantage.
Yeah. So that's another reason for you to learn Standard Mandarin, because if you ever want to use it one day in an official capacity, like for a job, or you want to even teach it like us one day, you need to learn the Standard Mandarin.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. Any business environment I've been in, anything like that, people start speaking Mandarin right away. I even had our friend once who runs a business here. She said, she answered the phone, and I noticed she was speaking very standard Mandarin on the phone. And she said, I said, why did you do that? Why did you speak Mandarin? We're in Sichuan. You could have She was just like, it's more professional. Comes across more professional. So that's a part of it too. And another thing about Standard Mandarin that I've noticed is that, one of the things about learning Standard Mandarin is your personality. Do you like to talk about, for example, like ideas or philosophy with people, which is kind of one of my things. I love talking about like a philosophical idea or economics or something. And I've noticed that when I get into those conversations, somebody previously might have been speaking their local dialect, like half local dialect, half Mandarin with me. And as soon as we start to get deeper into things and we're starting to talk about something a little bit deeper, they switch to Mandarin. And that's kind of an interesting observation. And I think it's because of the schooling situations. Like, okay, we're going in the realm of ideas now. Yeah. And this is part of the reason why, as I've developed my personal pronunciation, I'm a little bit probably more robotic than your standard person, but it's because it's the stuff I like to talk about. I like to go there. Whereas if you're looking to maybe be more, hang out with friends, chill out, whatever in that way, which we all want to do sometimes, then learning a bit of the local dialect can really help in that way. But standard Mandarin, it's going to be useful in so many layers.
And plus, you're going to come across as more intelligent if you speak it, and probably less intelligent if you speak let's be honest, if you speak a natural dialect, because it's usually, unfortunately, it's usually the less educated or usually the older generations of Chinese people that cannot speak standard Mandarin. So it's positives on all sides, but we're going to have a proper video on dialectical issues, like differences in dialects and stuff at the end of the course, towards the end of the course, where we talk about this in much more detail. In fact, if you're going to live in China, you live in a specific area with a dialect, we do suggest that you learn a few words and phrases. It wows people. It's good for that. But other than that, it's nothing you need to worry about, especially at this stage. So guys, bearing all this in mind, you should also remember that we'll most likely, once you get into the real world and start speaking Chinese, you might notice differences from what you heard on this course. So obviously on this course, you're hearing standard pronunciation only, but in the real world, when you start speaking to people from all parts of China, you know, if you actually come to China or you're in any city, Western city on the world, sure. There's a bunch of Chinese people everywhere now. So like, you'll probably hear all sorts of different dialects and you'll hear differences. You can embrace those differences, but make sure that you just stick to your guns, you know, and you're aware that that's not standard Mandarin. I'm going to speak standard Mandarin. And later on, if I decide, I might take on an accent or two if I like.
Yes, exactly. So enough of this theory. Let's get into it. Let's talk about pinyin, and we'll get started on the real meat of the course.